I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we meet today on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to all First Nations peoples. I really appreciate all of you who've roused yourselves early to attend breakfast this morning, and I know you'll agree that it's worth it when you've seen our speakers. We have three speakers today: Robert Bartrop, who is the Chief Revenue Officer with Zero Mass Water, Rob Fisher, Chief Financial and Operating Officer of WindLab, and Simon Kidston, Executive Director of Genex Power. Their more detailed bios are all on the conference website, so please do have a look for a bit more information about them. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Catherine Woodthorpe. I chair, amongst other things, the National Climate Science Advisory Committee of the Federal Government, the Bushfire and Natural Hazards Cooperative Research Centre, and the Antarctic Science Foundation, all of which obviously have a climate change as core part of their the research agendas. I was also a former director of ARENA, which is why I've been kindly asked to moderate today. And ARENA are sponsoring, or supporting, I think was the right word, this innovation session today. So just a quick couple of words about ARENA for those of you who are not familiar with it strongly. ARENA was established in July 2012, and since then it's supported nearly 500 renewable energy projects, driving innovations in solar PV, batteries, biofuels, hydrogen, solar thermal, ocean energy, pumped hydro, distributed energy and demand response. As of June this year, $1.44 billion in funding, with a total project value of $5.49 billion, has been invested in renewable energy projects. And that's a really important point, that one of the big things that ARENA has done is leverage a lot more money coming into the sector, and that's been incredibly important. In a bid to sharpen its investment focus, ARENA's recently announced a new set of investment priorities, supporting the integration of renewables in the electricity system, accelerating the development of Australia's hydrogen industry for domestic and export use, and supporting industry to reduce emissions through the uptake of renewables. The energy transition is underway, but there's still a lot of work to do, and ARENA has the expertise and deep understanding of the renewable energy sector to help address Australia's long-term needs. With their remaining time and money, of which there's not that much of either, they have a critical role to play in future-proofing our energy system and economy and helping to further unlock Australia's vast renewable resources. Today we're going to hear from three speakers talking with us about their innovation approach to the clean and renewable energy space. They'll each present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a panel session and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So to kick things off, and I think it'll be fairly bright and loud, please welcome Simon Kidston to the stage.
Firstly, thank you, Catherine. We'll get the presentation underway in a moment. Excellent. So, good morning, everyone. The photograph you see in front of you is a picture of our site that we're developing in North Queensland. It's the global first, and it's the integration of wind, solar and pump storage. And that's unique and a global first. And the reason why we believe it's significant, because the role of pump storage provides that of energy storage, a battery, essentially a giant water battery, and provides the ability to store surplus daytime energy if it's solar or wind energy, so that it can be dispatched on command when it's required by consumers of electricity. So what I'll do, I'm conscious a lot of people aren't particularly familiar with pump storage, and I think the best way to really illustrate what it's about is with this very short video.
Got a job. How about that, huh?
Okay, so that was a video kindly done by the Climate Council, but it does really highlight some of the characters we have up in North Queensland. And as you can see from that video, we're repurposing a gold mine. We're turning that infrastructure into a renewable energy hub. So we are an Australian company. We are listed on the ASX, and we've recently completed the funding events for our two short-term projects, the pump storage hydro project and the solar farm development we're doing in New South Wales. And our market capitalisation these days is around $100 million. In terms of our portfolio, I just might spend a few moments talking about the revenue model. And the reason why we think that's important is that our strategy within Genex is to provide long-term stable returns for its shareholders. And we do that through entering into long-term contractual arrangements to underpin our revenues. So if we look at our first project, our solar farm, it's 50 megawatts. It was the first development we completed up at Kidston. That project benefits from a 20-year revenue support deed from the Queensland Government. And the way that contract's been framed provides a very, very stable revenue footing, not just for the project finance that surrounded that project, but also allows for cash flow to return to the company to support the growth of the company. The real focus of the business now is completing the financing of our hydro pump storage project. And the way we're developing this is in partnership with Energy Australia. And of course, many of you will know that Energy Australia are a very large generator and retailer. And we've reached agreement with them such that they will own 50% of the asset with us, and they will provide a very long-term revenue support arrangement, effectively a tolling arrangement, which will support the project finance to fund the project. We believe that entering into a deal like this with VA is important. It provides Genex with the stable returns it's looking for to underpin the business, but also pump storage, as I'll explain in a moment, they're complex animals to model. They're complex animals to forecast revenues, and we see a very large gentailer, a very experienced energy trader in the form of EA providing that role, being our interface with the market, operating the asset in a way that optimises the outcome, and then providing the stable cash flow to the owners, which is themselves and Genex. We do have a pipeline of additional solar and wind surrounding that site, and we'll get to that once we've kicked off the construction of the hydro project, which we aim to do by the end of this calendar year. The other short-term growth for the company is the solar farm we're developing in New South Wales. It's located near the town of Forbes. There's nothing particularly remarkable about that project other than we will be financing that project on a merchant basis, which means that unlike the other projects, we won't be entering into long-term offtake arrangements. We'll be exposed to the spot market, and we believe in Queensland the energy price dynamics make that a very attractive proposition. And we'll have construction kicking off on that project in the next 2 weeks. In terms of timelines, I think the key thing the key takeaway from this slide is that the pump storage project, being our flagship, has a very long economic life. I guess in many ways it's similar to a battery. It stores energy, as I'll explain later. But with pump storage hydro, it's a very mature technology, and these assets tend to have economic lives of 80 plus years, up to 100 years. So in terms of key infrastructure for the grid, we expect this to be making a significant contribution for decades into the future. I will just highlight some of the clean energy credentials, which I guess everyone here is very focused on. And we see that by the time we've developed this portfolio, we will, through these projects, have contributed towards the abatement of 2 million tonnes of CO2. So a significant amount of CO2 abatement just in this little portfolio, which I guess is the sort of the CO2 that would be emitted by 250,000 households. So very, very significant amount of CO2 abatement, which will be, fully operational by 2023, over the next sort of 4 years or so. So pump storage, what is it? Well, it's really nothing more than a giant water battery. And the way this project's been configured, you've got two enormous holes in the ground, and when energy is in surplus, which is typically off-peak times, water is pumped from a low reservoir to an upper reservoir. That water is then stored and can be released through tunnels and turbines at times of peak demand. So traditionally, that tended to happen in the morning and the evening for peak prices for generation, with pumping occurring at, say, 3 o'clock in the morning or when people are asleep. Of course, we're seeing a rapid change in energy markets globally, and what we're now seeing is very, very low prices during the daytime when solar's at its peak. So that really, I think, will enable this asset to support the growth of additional renewables in Queensland and across the broader NEM through, I guess, harmonising and stabilising the grid and keeping the grid in balance. So, pump storage, I mentioned it's been around a long time. The first of these assets was actually built in the 1890s, and I believe that particular asset in Switzerland is still operating today. But in terms of installed capacity, you can see there is a significant amount of fleet in Europe, North America. There's a resurgence occurring in Asia at the moment. And in Australia, of course, we've got 3 operating plants, one of which is going through an expansion. We've got Wivenhoe near Brisbane, we've got Shoalhaven in the Kangaroo Valley, operated by Origin Energy, and Tumut 3, which is part of the Snow network. And as many of you know, that's now been dubbed Snowy 2.0 and is undergoing a significant expansion as we speak. So we'd expect the Kidston project to be the 4th project developed in this country. It will be the first privately developed project of its kind developed in this country, but we expect there to be a number of other projects to be developed over the next couple of years. We're aware of a couple of good projects in South Australia, for example, which are likely to be developed over the next 2 to 3 years. Many people ask me about the relative economics of pump storage versus batteries. We don't necessarily see batteries as a competing technology. They certainly have the same functionality. I guess the application for a battery tends to be for small-scale energy storage, where pump storage hydro is suited towards large-scale energy storage. But in terms of some of the economics and going on publicly reported information on battery deals, we believe that the cost on a per megawatt hour of energy stored for a battery, being a chemical battery or a lithium battery, is around sort of $700,000 to $800,000 per megawatt hour. And those projects tend to have economic lives of, say, 10 to 15 years, depending on how they're operated, with degradation over that period of time. But by comparison, pump storage, I guess, benefiting from scale, has a much, much lower capital cost per megawatt hour. Based on the economics of our project, that's below $250,000 per megawatt hour. The difference being, of course, a very, very long economic life of 80 to 100 years. So if you look at life and cost and degradation, clearly there's no real argument in terms of the efficient way to store energy on a large scale. In terms of the hydro project, we have said publicly that we will get to financial close this calendar year. And I guess the logos you see on this slide point to some of the partners that have been critical in enabling us to get to this point. So just stepping through those, Energy Australia I mentioned, investing the equity to get this project off the ground, providing a very, very long-term offtake arrangement, are critical to the project financing. RENA, who have been very, very supportive in terms of some of the early works done to some of the feasibility works done, which is obviously where the risk is, and RENA were very, very supportive of this company, this project, right from the beginning and outset. NAIF have announced publicly that they will be providing a very long-term concessional loan to fund the project, some $600 million, which is all the debt finance that's required for this project. We've recently brought on board a strategic investor at the public company level, J-Power, not a name that's well known in this country, but in Japan, they're one of the largest utilities in that country. They operate pump storage globally. I think 8 or 10 such plants. They've built them recently. And J-Power to Genex will provide more than money. They'll provide expertise through a technical sharing agreement where they'll second engineers to our Brisbane office to get this project delivered, get it built on time and on budget. In terms of how we're approaching this from a construction perspective, we're very conscious that we need, as a smaller company, a fixed price contract, and we've entered into, or about to enter into, an arrangement with two very well-known, large and experienced Australian contractors in the form of John Holland and McConnell Dow. So clearly we see those groups as tier one partners to get this project delivered. I will also acknowledge the Queensland Government, who have announced recently that they will co-fund with us a new transmission line to our project, which will not only enable our project to be connected to the NEM, but also open up northwest Queensland to further development. And happily, that's a part of Queensland which is rich in wind resources, which no doubt will be welcomed by the grid as they seek to increase the wind exposure. I will actually say that there has been some fundamental changes or shifts in energy markets, which I guess people in the industry are grappling with. It makes it complex to develop projects these days. But some of those dynamics, we believe, will favour and reward energy storage, whether that's battery storage through chemicals or through pump storage hydro. There's some technical rules which have meant that energy is now priced in 5-minute increments from 30 minutes previously. That will obviously reward any generator that can start or stop quickly to capture high price environments or low price environments. But what we're also seeing, and this chart in front of you shows you an average of the first week of September in Queensland, where for the first time we saw a sustained period of time when energy prices went negative. So in the NEM, energy prices can go to a maximum of $14,000 per megawatt hour. They can go to a minimum of $1,000 per megawatt hour. So what that means, if energy prices are negative and you're a generator, you get paid to pump if you're consuming energy, and likewise you get penalised if you generate during a negative price environment. You have to pay money to the NEM for the privilege of generating electricity into the NEM. So effectively it's a little bit like double dipping. If you're a pump storage group, you can actually get paid to pump during the middle of the day in the case of surplus solar energy, but at the same time you'll then get paid to generate at times of peak demand, which is often in the early evening and early morning. So it's a new dynamic. We don't expect to see that every day, but certainly we expect to see the prevalence of that increasing over the next decades to come. So in terms of the outlook for Genex, and I guess renewables more broadly, we see this business as being fundamentally underpinned by long-term contractual arrangements. That's evidenced by our first project, our solar farm, the KS1, with a 20-year contract with the Queensland Government. That's been replicated with our pump hydro development. That won't come on stream until 2023, but when it does, it'll be supported by a very long, very stable contract with one of the largest energy retailers in this country. And we see some growth really happening through the rapid development of our New South Wales solar farm. We expect that project will double our revenues in the next 12 months when it comes on stream in around October of next year. So I'd like, I guess, to summarise by saying Genex, it's cash flow positive. We believe we've got embedded growth. That growth is funded, and it's a globally unique project. So thank you very much for your interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. We'll save all the questions to a panel session at the end. So next we're going to hear from Rob Fisher of WindLab to change it up in terms of the different areas of innovation we're looking at.
Thanks, Catherine. The presentation on the screen. Look, I'm going to talk a bit about WindLab, introduce the company to everybody, but also talk about some of the projects we've done with the support of ARENA over the last few years, and some of the opportunities we see to continue working in renewables into the future. So, WindLab. We were one of the first commercialisation projects from the CSIRO, and I'm pleased to meet a couple of people here today who were around CSIRO back in those days and knew our founders when they were the Wind Science Laboratory at CSIRO. The technology that they developed at CSIRO was a set of atmospheric models, and we've taken that technology and used it to build a business over the last 16 years. Across multiple continents. We're based in Canberra. We're one of the few listed private companies in Canberra, public companies in Canberra. But we have offices across Australia, in North America, and increasingly in Africa. We're in there's places like Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, and Cape Town. In the last 16 years, we've identified many sites. We have 45 projects that we're working on developing around the world. We've constructed 9 projects, or 9 of our sites have been built, over a gigawatt of wind energy on 3 continents. We've got 12 projects in our portfolio at the moment that are fully approved and ready to move into construction in the next couple of years. We're also asset managers. We manage our own projects, and we manage other people's projects, particularly on behalf of relatively passive financial investors who don't want the complexity of managing a solar farm or a wind farm or of interacting with the NEM. As our business has evolved, we've taken interest in our projects, and we have about 40 megawatts of wind and solar that we have an ownership interest in. So what does our technology do? Essentially, it's an atmospheric model, or a number of atmospheric models with a statistical black box that sits between them. And what it does is to take topographic data, the shape of the land, measured by NASA using satellites, and model a cube of atmosphere moving across that land. And what matters for a long-term commercial wind resource is a predictable, consistent wind pattern. And what our guys have identified is that happens predictably at the top of certain shaped hills with a particular orientation. And our technology, Windscape, is able to find those hills. We have a team of guys in Canberra who sit there all day mapping the planet, looking for sites, whether that's in Tanzania, in Victoria, wherever. We can do that entirely from the computer in Canberra. And over 16 years, we've identified that we have about a 2% plus or minus margin of error in our wind forecasts. These are 20, 30-year wind forecasts, so we can make very accurate predictions about what the wind will do. What you can see on the screen is our Canoa Bridge wind farm in Victoria. So you can see at a countrywide level, it's almost impossible to tell where small wind sites are. It's very easy to see the coast of Western Australia is windy, it's red. It's easy to see the Snowy Mountains are windy. Now, there's no one on that part of the Western Australian coast, and there's very few places in the Snowy Mountains we're allowed to build wind farms. So what we do is zoom into a much greater level of detail. And Windscape can get down to 100 metres by 100 metre resolution, which is what you see on the right-hand slide. That's important because a modern wind turbine is 150 metres across. It's a very large machine. And so without even visiting a site, we can produce very accurate, very detailed plans, what we call a virtual wind farm. And we can sort through many opportunities and choose the very best projects to pursue. When we do that, we produce projects like the 2 on the screen. This is a chart of capacity factors of wind farms in Australia last year. Capacity factors, the proportion of the theoretical maximum energy that a project could produce. The 2 red columns are Canoa Bridge Wind Farm and Kayata Wind Farm, which are 2 little projects we've built in Victoria. And you can see they are dramatically outperforming every other wind farm in the country. They're close to a 50% capacity factor. When you read IEA reports, various international reports on the wind industry, you'll see a figure of 30% as a global average. Partly that's because we're using very large turbines, but it's also a testament to the quality of the wind resource and the design of those projects. WindLab has 45 projects that we're working on around the world. We work in Australia, we work in North America, South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And there's a brief summary of those projects on the screen. How do we make money from all this? We are, after all, in business and need to make money from identifying the sites. The first revenue source is development margins. So we sell our projects down to some extent to investors who want long-term yielding assets. We are developers and prospectors. Our shareholders are looking for a different return profile to perhaps an infrastructure fund. So we look to sell down and take advantage of the difference in cost of capital between those sources of funds. We get paid from success fees. Sometimes we sell projects that we don't have the resources to pursue ourselves. So, for example, in the US, where we don't have a long-term interest in production tax credits, we will sell projects on and we'll take fees when those projects reach financial close or are complete. As I said earlier, we're asset managers. So we take recurring revenue from our projects in the form of asset management fees and from third-party projects that we manage. We manage just over $1 billion worth of renewable assets in Australia at the moment. And finally, we do keep an interest in our projects. In Australia, in South Africa, we want to keep a part of the projects. We want to build a recurring revenue base for the company. So let me talk a bit about why we're in wind and why we believe in wind as an important part of the renewable mix into the future. You'll all be aware that the levelised cost of generation of energy in Australia and around the world for wind and solar is low. It is the cheapest form of new generation, or they are effectively the cheapest forms of new generation in the world, and that's a dynamic that will persist for some time. A lot of renewables are going to get built, much more than has already been built today. So we looked at that economic situation, and our scientists in Canberra asked the question, what gets built? Is it solar? Is it wind? What's the mix of technologies that gets built? And in the course of their analysis, they identified a couple of things, and Simon touched on this in his presentation earlier. In Australia, the NEM is very long and narrow. It runs pretty much north-south, and what that means is that most of the solar farms in Australia generate at exactly the same time. There's something like half an hour difference from one side of the eastern states to the other in terms of when the sun comes up and when it goes down. So at the top of this slide, you can see 3 different solar farms, which are spread apart over 1,000 kilometres on the east coast of Australia. And this is a chart of their generation profile over the course of a couple of weeks. And you can see that they are generating very much consistently, very much at the same time of day. And that's driving those negative prices to a large extent that Simon showed in his slide a little while ago. At the bottom, the very messy, uncorrelated chart is 3 wind farms with similar spacing. Wind doesn't have that same characteristic of always blowing at the same time. Across that enormous distance that we have on the east coast of Australia, there's very large variation. And that's particularly true of North Queensland versus Victoria and South Australia. Everything in South Australia blows at a reasonably consistent time of the day, but while that's happening, you could well have tropical weather conditions up in North Queensland. You'll have very different conditions in northern New South Wales, and there's significant diversity in the generation profiles. We'll skip over this one. This is a different version of Simon's slide that's not quite so scary, showing the daytime dip from solar in Queensland. That was in August before the September negative price events. This is the generation profile of solar in Queensland, matched against demand. The blue line is demand for power in Queensland. The orange is the generation profile of solar. The Queensland government has a 50% renewable energy target. And so we asked ourselves, how do we get to that with wind and solar? What does wind do when you add that into the mix in Queensland? There's very few wind resources in Queensland. It's rare, and what resources there are turn out to be incredibly important. When we overlay wind generation on top of solar, and this is scaled up to the point where we would have 50% of generation in Queensland coming from renewables, you get a profile that looks like the one shown on the screen. It doesn't match demand exactly. It gets pretty close. And what you can see is the wind blows at night in Queensland, particularly in the tropics. There's a very consistent, very predictable nighttime wind pattern. What that means is that the wind in Queensland and in North Queensland is critically important to building the 50% renewable target in that state. And this is a dynamic we see in other states, other countries around the world as well. Wind does have a nighttime bias. It's highly complementary to solar. You can, of course, see the little dip in the afternoon there that the pumped hydros and batteries of the world will be so important in managing. So having identified all this dynamic, we went out and thought we'd put it to the test. And with the help of ARENA, who are putting on today's session, we have constructed the Kennedy Energy Park near Hughenden in Queensland, a little bit south of where Genex is building their pumped hydro. Kennedy is a 60 megawatt project made up of a wind farm, a solar farm and a small battery, which smooths out the generation profile. And what Kennedy demonstrates, we've just started generating at that site in the last couple of months, what it demonstrates is that wind, solar and batteries together can produce very stable, very consistent and predictable power. There's a nice picture of the site with the turbines in the solar farm and the layout. And as Simon's video demonstrated, this is another very small, isolated community in Queensland where people have suddenly got jobs and are working again, which is one of the very happy side benefits of what we do. Here's the generation profile at Kennedy, very similar to the dynamic we identified across the whole state. And we can say that Kennedy is capable of producing a flat block of power, a consistent generation profile every day of the year, bar 7, which is effectively when we'll be doing our scheduled maintenance. And that's a consistency of generation that even many fossil fuel generators will struggle to match. Beyond our Kennedy project, we have a number of other sites in North Queensland, and Genex is shown there as the blue dot in the middle. Between Genex and our Kennedy Energy Park, we have a site we call Big Kennedy. It's a very, very large wind resource. it is key to getting Queensland to a 50% renewable energy target for the reasons that I've explained earlier. We also have a number of other sites in that part of the world, and we'll be looking to develop those over incoming years. Big Kennedy, potentially 2 gigawatts of wind. It's an enormous site with an incredible wind resource, very, very high capacity factor, 45% plus. And that site's one we've been working on for a long time. And as the Queensland Government is now looking to fund transmission and to build transmission lines in the area, we'll be accelerating Big Kennedy into the future. The other thing we do at WindLab is we work in Africa. And people often ask, what on earth are you doing there? You're an Australian listed company. The reason we're there, first of all, is the wind profile. And you can see those trees. That's a site we identified on the computer in Canberra. It was a red dot on our map, and we went out there and saw the trees look like that and thought, yep, we got it right again, fellas. That's a good result. So obviously it also comes from one direction, which makes the design of the wind farm a very simple straight line. We've been working in South Africa since 2007. We've built 2 projects in that market, and South Africa was running a world-leading renewable procurement program for a long time, which has come to a little bit of a halt recently, but we understand is going to revive in coming years. We have 5 more projects fully approved and developed in South Africa, and looking to fund those and get those through the government procurement process in the next couple of years. The rest of Africa is where our future lies, we think. There are 620 million people in sub-Saharan Africa without access to power. Ethiopia uses the same amount of power as Canberra. Canberra has 400,000 people, Ethiopia has 40 million. And if Africa is to develop in the way that the world expects, it needs power. We need to turn the lights on. So we made a deliberate decision to go into East Africa, in particular Tanzania, Mozambique, Zambia, Kenya and Ethiopia, and identify the windiest sites and secure them a number of years ago. So we have 16 sites across those countries that we have secured, and we're working in partnership with Eurus Energy from Japan, which is a subsidiary of Toyota, to build those projects and get them connected in the next 10 years. 2 lead projects, and this is our community engagement program in Tanzania with our motorbike mounted speaker. Lead project is Miombo Hawani in Tanzania. We have 300 megawatts there. The government's running a procurement program late this year, and we hope to be successful in getting that project away. It's the first approved wind farm in Tanzania. Now that's not without its financing challenges. We're working through those, and one of the steps we made on that front in Kenya earlier this year, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Japanese government, the Kenyan government, and our friends at Toyota to develop the Meru Energy Park in Kenya, which is a hill in Kenya with exactly the same characteristics as Kennedy. It's windy at night. It's got a big flat solar panel area next to it, and we can put a battery in and solve some of the problems in that part of the Kenyan grid. So we're looking to develop that in very much the same manner as we did with Kennedy Energy Park. Despite all the development work, we still have a team of scientists in Canberra, and we are working on an R&D project at the moment, supported by ARENA, to solve a particular problem in the NEM that some of the projects we manage are experiencing. In the NEM in Australia, AEMO forecasts wind on behalf of wind farms. If you have a wind farm, you're connected. AEMO forecasts when you will generate and how much you will generate. And despite their best efforts, they're often wrong. And unfortunately, the way the system works is when they're wrong, we get penalised. We pay a bill. It's called an FCAS charge. And that's true for every wind farm in the Australian market. ARENA and AEMO have been funding a number of parties, including WindLab, to find solutions to that problem, to enable generators to forecast their own generation and minimise the cost to the generator, but also the cost to the system and having to deal with forecast errors. So how's WindLab approaching the problem? Well, we put some very smart PhDs in a room and said, think about this, fellas, what can you do? And they said, well, what if we put a device upwind of the wind farm and see what the wind is doing there and see if 5 minutes later it's doing the same thing downstream? And so we talked to ARENA. ARENA helped us to buy some LiDAR devices. You can see one of those on the screen. And the guys have put them out around our Kayata wind farm in Victoria. They're measuring the wind upwind. They then compare that to the wind speed at the turbines. And they're using a machine learning algorithm or machine learning to build an algorithm to match those two things. So they can forecast very, very accurately what's going on at the wind farm by measuring the wind upstream. Sounds simple, but the problem, of course, is the wind can come from any direction, so we've got to take something like, I think it's 36 different measurements around the wind farm and build 36 different algorithms that then feed into one engine to forecast. Good news is we've done that. It seems to work. We're connecting it to on a trial basis at the moment, and we should have results in the very near future. So thanks to ARENA, we're able to continue the scientific work that the company was founded on. There's a little more on that. So thanks again to ARENA. In summary, that's WindLab. We're a scientific company to begin with. We continue to use science to get renewables right. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob. Well, I hope, compared to last night, everyone's hope levels are rising. Certainly mine have been so far, with two really interesting presentations and one more to come from Rob Bartrop on an area that I really know nothing about, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what Zero Mass Water is doing.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. I am from Zero Mass Water. We're a US-based renewable water company. So unlike the other two presenters, we generate water from using renewable resources. We're a growth stage company that was founded in 2014. We are now about 150 people globally, and our largest investor is Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and have a number of other investors, from family offices to impact funds to Macquarie Capital, being one of the Australian shareholders. Our company is based around our technology, which is called Source. It is a hydro panel that makes clean drinking water using energy from the sun and moisture from the air. So it's sunlight and air making water, 100% infrastructure free. The remarkable thing about this technology is that it locates water production at the point of consumption, a very well-known concept in renewable energy and telecommunications, a very foreign concept in water, which is very much in kind of Roman era technology as it relates to centralised water collection and distribution. To give you a sense of where we're active is probably best highlighted by my week this week. So yesterday I was in Canberra. We are working on a number of community impact projects to do with the drought relief, so looking at regional and remote parts of the country, near-term deployment, tens of thousands of homes, getting resilient drinking water supply at a community, institutional and household level. Also working on with a large number of Indigenous projects, so remote Australia does not enjoy anywhere near the quality of water that we do in Sydney, and despite it being a human right, is frankly just not served by the centralised infrastructure. As well as a number of other regional projects in the Pacific. After this, so this afternoon, I'm going to India. We've got a roundtable tomorrow with about 30 corporates looking at the role they can play with NGOs and government in meeting the Modi government's new policy to connect every household in India to clean drinking water by 2024. They're currently at 42% of households. And when you look at why they're not connecting more, it's because of the same issues Australia has. It's low-density living villages. There's over 1 million villages in India that don't have connections to clean drinking water. From India, I'm going to Dubai. We're launching a 6-star resort in Dubai that is plastic-free and is only served by source water. So everyone at the resort gets a reusable container and drinks water that's the quality of Voss mineral water at less than 10% of the cost and with zero plastic. So getting a premium, resilient drinking water option with no plastic. And then following that in Dubai, we've got 80 of our partners who are serving these 33 countries through distribution, installation of the product. Our main core business beyond that is a service-based business, so water purchase agreements, very much identical structure to a PPA, allowing governments and corporates to procure water at scale across a wide variety of locations. A couple of highlights about what this may look like. Here's an installation that's part of a 10,000 home sustainable community in Texas. So this community is carbon neutral, it's zero plastic, and it's premium sustainable living with a top-tier developer in the US. Here's a project in Vanuatu that was funded by the Asian Development Bank as part of the rebuilding efforts from Cyclone Pam in 2015. So providing clean, resilient, climate-proof drinking water in the Pacific to a school and a village on the island of Tanna. And another village, one of the 1 million villages in India, that's another example in partnership with the government of Maharashtra. So noting that most people in the room are electricity people, as I was until the last 3 years or so, just wanted to kind of take a step back and look at the problem we're trying to solve, which is water. So Earth is the water planet. It is the source of life because we have water, and it's also the great qualities that make water the source of life, in that it's a great solvent to provide nutrients to plants and people. It also is responsible for 1 in 2 hospital beds worldwide. So the same things that make it great make it terrible. And when you look at water, only 2.5% of the water in the world is fresh water. So immediately this abundant sort of water we have is quite limited. Of that 2.5%, less than a third is accessible. So the bulk of it is contained in caps and at the north and south pole. So of the accessible water, which is a fraction of 1%, a third of 1% of that 1% is on the surface. The rest is in the atmosphere and in aquifers in the ground. And so when we look at the amount of water on the planet, the amount that we can actually access from lakes and rivers is completely minuscule. We here in Australia are on the driest inhabited continent on Earth, which makes it even more of a challenge. And when you go outside Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, it gets even harder, and as we're all seeing in Western New South Wales. So we've got a problem, and this isn't an Africa-India problem, this is a global problem, and we have that problem being made worse through climate, which is the reason we're here today, and we also have that problem being made worse through population growth, which is obviously related to the climate issue as well. That being said, there's a bunch of really good people trying to solve the problem. The most prominent here is Arena. I see Anne and Nick here, who have been fantastic advocates. They enabled our market entry with a countrywide demonstration in 2018. We've now done over 60 projects in Australia, including some meaningful scale ones. So the technology is very much alive and well here in Australia. We've done over 5 local government projects. We've done schools. We've done NGO projects with people like Conservation International, WWF, and a whole host of corporate work in between. I think when we look at the object of this of solving the problem, it's important to look at how it's currently being solved, and that is with a really good product called bottled water that is providing clean drinking water to people all over the world and providing a healthy alternative. I mean that quite seriously. It's in a terrible packaging, and it's not a resilient solution. So when we look at bottled water globally, we've got 500 billion single-use plastic bottles being used every year. It's a bigger market than soft drink, so it is the dominant beverage market in the world. Right here in Australia, where everyone says we don't have a water problem, it's $1 billion market. You only have to walk down the aisle of a grocery store and see that the water aisle is as big as the soft drink aisle. And for a lot of places, like a lot of the drought relief efforts going on, people are sending trucks of bottled water, so it remains the best way to get clean tap water to people that don't have it. And there's probably, our estimates are, there's about 1 million homes in Australia that don't have clean drinking water at tap. So anyone that lives on a farm, anyone that lives in a remote area, and you're now in a situation where that number could rise dramatically with the likes of Tamworth, Broken Hill and others being literally months away from the taps running dry. The existing infrastructure is ageing, so urban cities enjoy great quality drinking water. That's not the case in places like Midwest WA or far west New South Wales. So we've literally got, in the US, it's trillions. In the Australian, it's tens of billions of infrastructure that is suitable at delivering okay water, but is not providing high quality water for people to drink, to people that live in low density areas and remote locations. So the gross market opportunity is immense. A couple of highlights of installations we've done. The town of Gundy, this was a Arena funded project. Gundy is about an hour and a half from Muswellbrook in the Upper Hunter Valley. There's no pipes in Gundy, so there's a couple of hundred homes. There's never been any drinking water infrastructure in Gundy. They pump from a river, and that river's been dry for about 3 years now. So this is a town 3.5 hours drive from here, perfectly nice town, no water. The cost of extending infrastructure to them is completely prohibitive. We installed a source array at the War Memorial Hall there, and residents enjoy that to drink. Up the road from Gundy is a bigger town called Murrurundi, which is a much larger town and does have tap water, but that tap water has run dry. So this is a project that was donor funded at Murrurundi Public School and provides now the only source of clean water in the town while the town waits for a larger pipeline project to be delivered. Again, this is less than 4 hours drive from here. Outside of that, there's obviously a huge number of farms who only rely on tank water to drink. Aside from some concern on quality, there's obviously a question on resilience with drought conditions like we have now. So all of these people currently drive to the shops and buy bottled water because it is literally the best available option for them to do. And so we are partnering in bulk infrastructure at a household, institutional and community level to provide an alternative that is delivered at about 1/3 of the cost of, say, Never Fail Water or a bulk water service like you would see in an office. Here's another example of a community array that's on Stradbroke Island that was delivered with a private funder in the last couple of months and part of ecotourism remote infrastructure that we're building. In summary, what we're currently doing is using this technology to provide a different type of drinking water that is able to increase the capacity of regional and remote parts of the country, and also complement existing sources like water from the tap, water from tanks, water from bores that are perfectly suitable for bulk water uses like showers, toilets, and gardens. And so we are doing this at scale. We're currently building a development pipeline around $100 million of assets that are contracted to top tier kind of counterparties, being government and corporates. Looking to secure resilient drinking water using renewable energy and reduce plastic. So that's the summary.
Do stay. I'll sit at the end much as Bernie did yesterday because it's much easier to just get one crick in my neck rather than several. If you'd like to grab that. That was an amazing presentation, all of you. As I said, I think compared to last night, where although it was light-hearted, nonetheless there was quite a sort of somber mood about some of the issues that we're facing, but listening to how innovation will actually drive opportunities to face the challenge that the Earth and humanity faces over the next little while has certainly lifted my spirits this morning. I'd just like to start off with my first question, and then if anybody's got burning questions, I'll go to the floor, but I do have a couple of questions if everyone's feeling shy. But for each of you, if you could just say, what's your number one challenge this next 12 months that you need to overcome in order to be getting your business on the right path, or in the case of those who are already well established, in expanding your businesses? Maybe just go in order. Start with you, Rob.
I think the biggest challenge for us, and I think for the renewable industry in Australia, is grid connection at the moment. The regulators have caught up to the recent gold rush in solar, particularly in the country, and are updating the rules furiously, and making sure we comply and are able to connect our projects is probably our biggest issue.
I think that's certainly true for a number of people.
Our biggest problem is frankly the incumbent infrastructure in the water space is very similar to what it was like in power 15 or 20 years ago, where the thought of a different type of contribution is kind of frowned upon, and the embracement of innovation is largely in a centralised way, so looking equivalent of kind of clean coal. And I think one of the things I've noticed in transitioning from energy to water is that you don't have people like Arena in water whose job it is to look at constraints and unlock innovation and kind of modernise things. And so where we've seen the most traction is more community-focused people, health, education, regional development, who have embraced it with open arms. Whereas the water sector, you see $1 billion on the weekend, which is for 2 or 3 dams that will be helpful in 10 years.
Maybe.
And that's not a bad initiative, but there's no near-term kind of counterbalance to that. It's more focused on what communities are drinking. And, kids in communities drink Coke and Pepsi, right? They don't drink dirty water. They drink that, and then you've got a whole bunch of opportunity limitations based on that.
A whole heap of health issues that arise, and I really liked your analogy about it's a Roman answer to the problem that's instant vision of aqueducts all over Europe. It was a great analogy. Simon.
So look, I guess as a generator, I guess we'd see the same challenges that Windlab would see, and clearly the grid is a major constraint now, limiting factor to new development of renewable projects. So I'd share Rob's comments there.
And Rob Fisher, how will climate change affect your modelling?
Look, I'll preface my answer by saying I'm an accountant rather than a scientist, but I have the privilege of working with some very smart scientists, and they tell me it won't. What really matters for a wind resource is the shape of the land.
Topography.
And the topography and the fact that the atmosphere exists and moves. And with those things, that's not going to change.
Interesting. I just had that thought occur to me. And one quick one for Rob Bartrop. How much water does one of those single panels actually make?
Sure. So the smallest we do is a residential system, which is 2 panels, which I've got on my roof at home. We have about 300 litres a month from that. So the equivalent of 600 bottles of Mount Franklin, or a 20-pack every day for the month. So really used for drinking, cooking purposes, not for showering and toilets. And then we've got one in a community application in southeast Queensland, which is about an acre of panels, about 1,000. That's about 1 million litres a year. So there's the ability to build resilient community-level systems as well.
Fantastic. Now, hard to see through the lights. Martijn? By the way, for those, all of you know Martijn as chair of ARENA.
So throughout your journey, you've at various times, all of you have struggled getting financing, and you've got a room full of financiers here. So what are the lessons that you've had about why is it difficult to really attract a lot of money to scale up?
Look, there's obviously been the well-publicised climate wars and I guess lack of consensus on energy policy. And there's no doubt that that's the number one question I get from international investors, particularly when they look at Australian opportunities. So that's clearly an issue. I think the other key constraint to developing these projects and accessing capital is the ability to contract revenues in a form that's acceptable to lenders. And I think that that's been a major challenge that most in the industry have experienced. It certainly was the lead challenge we had for our hydro project. Being the first pump storage project developed in this country, we were leading the way. I'm sure those that follow will find it somewhat easier, but it took us at least 18 months really to get the revenue model right in a form that was bank friendly to support the development of that project.
Yeah, I think at a project level, the financing space is very mature now. We're able to finance specific projects through infrastructure funds, through project lending. At a corporate level, we've struggled a little bit to explain what we actually do and to explain to investors how the development business works. We're a listed company, and I think public markets struggle a little with lumpy development revenues. We often send out one invoice a year rather than one every month, the way the public markets would like. The other thing we struggle with is explaining the African story to Australian investors. People in Australia don't like African risk and don't really understand what we're doing over there.
And yet, interestingly, if you look at other things like telecommunications, banking and other areas, the African story is of leapfrogging old technologies, Roman technologies, whichever way you want to look at it, and actually developing their infrastructure in small, connectable ways rather than the big old-fashioned centralised. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity, but I can imagine the problem you have explaining that.
Tell your friends.
Yeah, I do.
I'd also just add to that, being a lot earlier stage from a market creation point of view, very similar to solar. I was lucky to be part of the first kind of 3 utility-scale solar projects in Australia, and those returns were like very nice, double-digit unlevered returns. And so I think what we're looking at now in water is an environment where people go in Walgett to the IGA, which actually just burnt down, and buy Mount Franklin for $3.50, right? So the actual value at the drinking water end is huge, and similar to solar, if you want to roll up your sleeves and help create that market, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's through, connecting the dots with mining companies and things like that, there's actually very attractive returns. And so the assets we're looking at are designed as solar farms, but they offer, returns which are more common in solar, from 5 or 10 years ago than, unfortunately, the kind of the knife fight that a mature technology brings.
Is there someone with the mic? Okay, thank you.
Hi, just a question for the Zero Mass Water.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself as well?
Nicholas Wood from Energetics. Sorry, I was too busy thinking about thermodynamics. So Zero Mass Water, it's an atmospheric chiller, and what's its limits of operation for very dry climates? And can you run it at night with the battery when the thermodynamics is more favourable?
Sure, so I'll answer the first part. It's not a solar-powered air conditioner. So what it is actually material science, a hygroscopic material that's similar to the way that sugar will clump when you leave the lid off a bowl. We absorb water from the air. And that process is uniquely efficient. Efficient meaning you can do it without electricity, and efficient meaning that in Arizona or in Alice Springs, where it's 10% humidity, you still generate water every day. We then condense the water through solar thermal. So we use hot air. We actually don't use electricity. We use hot air to drive the condensation. In the same way that steam in a shower will condense when it hits a wall. The wall's not cold, the steam's hot. And so because of the second answer, it works during the day, but we are working on ways to absorb more of the water using the higher humidity at night.
Got a question at the back there? Yeah, sorry, you're behind the pillar, so you...
Sorry, I'll try and... Here I am. Melinda White, IFM Investors. It's just a question for Rob from Zero Mass Water, isn't it? Could you possibly just walk us through the time that it took from concept idea to maturity of the panels that you're putting on the ground, and whether they're at a cost now that's sort of competitive and able to be scaled up and sold effectively without full philanthropic type funding, and what the challenges might have been in that really early stage of getting funding to be able to keep iterating the idea through to something that was commercialised?
Sure. So the technology has been about 9 years in development. The first 3 years of that was at Arizona State University by our founder, who's a PhD from MIT. And in 2014, we spun into a private company, and when I joined in 2017, it was just getting commercialised. So 3 years of the real development phase. Since 2017, we've actually gone through 6 versions of the product. The core technology is consistent. A lot of it is to do with the application, so how to increase the lifetime, how to increase the water quality, how to increase the ease of installation and things like that. And we've seen enormous learnings through that, like a factor of 10 kind of cost reduction. At the moment now, we can provide clean drinking water anywhere in the world for sort of 10 to 15 cents per litre. And we've got a line of sight to sub 5 cents a litre in the next kind of 3 years. I will note that cents per litre are heavily distorted by scale. So I can say I can get you water at 5 cents a litre from a filtration plant, but that assumes I'm doing like 1 billion litres of water a day, right? So the cost of these filtration plants is like $10 million for one town. With our technology, we can service 50 towns with clean water for a fraction of that cost. So the ability to make a broad impact on the biggest problem versus a huge quantity for one location. And that's the attractiveness in remote sites particularly.
Fantastic. I've got time for one more. Mara? Sorry, have I missed anyone else?
Thank you so much. Oh, it's such an honor to be able to ask. I feel so guilty. I'm interested in how we get the energy guys to be a little bit more like our water fellow. If we take the hypothesis that the future, because of climate change, is more likely than not to be decentralized and distributed, how do we begin to get pumped hydro on my rooftop? How do I take my solar during the day to pump up to a water tank to bring it down? How do I get wind on the top of my electric vehicle? How do communities that are coming out of the ground in this world with very high risk, and I'm looking at the Roman system and just asking myself, are we rebuilding a Roman system of energy distribution that we will regret 20 years from now deeply. And that ability to iterate and constantly improve the technology so it really drives down a cost curve.
So look, there's no doubt that there will be an increased amount of energy storage locally at the household level. I guess at the moment the economics don't support the deployment of batteries. It's prohibitively expensive, and for that reason, I guess purely economic reasons, the focus is at large-scale pump storage hydro. But I would imagine if we cast forward 10, 15 years, that may very well change. With the economics justified, I'm sure that will accelerate the deployment over that period.
I'd add to that. I think there is, our view is that long term there's still a need for large-scale generation. Consumer demand in Australia is about 1/3 of the electricity sector. The rest of it is commercial and industrial. And those users will need large-scale generation plants. And if we're going to build wind farms and solar farms, we need to build them in places that are windy and sunny. And that's not always where those commercial and industrial users are. I don't think we can build wind turbines around Sydney Harbour, unfortunately, although it's quite windy. So we see that there's still a long-term future for large-scale transmission and generation.
It'll be both. It'll be community level and it will be those larger scale ones. Well, we've run out of time, sadly. Sorry I missed a chance to get to your question, but you can buttonhole them later, I've no doubt. As I said earlier, I leave this session feeling a lot more hopeful. I think the opportunities that innovation will enable us to drive the future without carbon in our lives will be immense. And to the three of you, thanks for giving us an opportunity to understand how you're contributing to that. Thank you.